Okay, start webinar. Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome. I am very happy that all of you are joining us today. Welcome to this IPR webinar. I'm going to mention a few housekeeping notes and then we will get started. A few notes. This is being recorded. It will be available for playback within 48 hours and it will be emailed to you as well as available on our website and YouTube channel. We will include audience Q&A, so definitely let us know if you have any questions. And then if you do have any tech difficulties, feel free to message me um, privately and we will work to resolve any of those. And then I would love to introduce our moderator and presenter, Angela Dwyer, VP of Insights at Full Intel. She is, as the VP of Insights at Full Intel, a media intelligence company that specializes in news monitoring and analysis. As a measurement expert, she helps brands improve business results through data-driven, actionable insights. She has presented and published several original award-winning research papers about news content that drives recall, engagement, and trust. Her contribution to the field has been celebrated with several industry awards, including a PR News People of the Year Award as a data and measurement game changer and the 2025 AMEC Measurement Executive of the Year. And so she will now take the floor to introduce our panelists. Thank you for being
Great.
here.
Thank you, Brittany. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I see Tunisia. That's amazing. So you're joining us from quite a ways away. Thank you for joining today. As mentioned, I'm Angela Dwyer. I'm going to jump in and introduce our three panelists who are joining us today. First, Amber Doherty. She's the Director of Value and Impact at Big Valley Marketing. She is obsessed with how communicators can better connect their work to business impact, especially through smarter measurement and organizational listening. She serves on the AMEC board and the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission, and she spends much of her time speaking, writing, and thinking about how PR and comms teams can move beyond vanity metrics toward more meaningful evidence of impact. She's also an amazing athlete. She's a runner and she loves books, things I love about her. We're joined by Lightning Sabowski. He's an associate professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We were with him at Chapel Hill just about 2 weeks ago, a week ago. He's the director of the Institute of Public Relations Measurement Commission and a member of IPR Elevate. His main area of focus is public relations measurement, especially as it relates to diverse, micro, and niche audiences. He's also a licensed attorney in North Carolina, a big fan of river otters, and has been to Antarctica. So talk to him about that. Jen Francis is part of the corporate communications team at Accenture, where she focuses on the intersection of AI and communication strategy. She spends her time exploring the strategic implications of emerging technologies and how they fundamentally reshape the pathways to visibility and audience engagement. She is also an avid scuba diver, over 200 dives. That's really amazing. So you can talk to her about that. So let's jump in today. As audiences increasingly get their information through AI search engines like ChatGPT and Google's AI overviews, where 60% of searches now result in 0 clicks, it's probably a higher number now, the pathways to visibility have fundamentally changed, right? Earned media is no longer just about securing coverage. It's about earning a place in AI-generated responses that synthesize and cite information for millions of users. As a result, the way we measure potential media impact also changes. So all of us here on the panel, we are IPR Elevate members. We've had time interacting with each other over the past few years, discussing AI and its impact on communications, and we're going to hear that in our conversation. But before we jump into the panel and the discussion, I'm actually going to start with about a 10 to 15 minute presentation on a hot off the press study on AI search engines. And I worked on this study with Dr. Tyler Page from the University of Connecticut and Katie Michelle, Insights Manager at Full Intel. We shared this study with a select group of communicators at IPR Bridge, and we're excited to share it with you today. There will also be a white paper coming out this week on the study that you can find on the Full Intel LinkedIn page, and we'll send it out after the webinar with the recording. So if you want to dive a little bit more and see that white paper, we'll share that out as well. So with that, I'm going to share my screen for a moment here. Perfect. And jump into a few findings before we continue our discussion. So let's jump right in. we've already talked about the media landscape and how things are changing, right? Change isn't unique, but what is unique in this moment of time is the velocity of change, with AI search engine models influencing how consumers discover information that influences what they think and what they do. Social media, it still matters. About 70% of audiences get their news from social media. But clicks to actual news sites, they're not really happening. In fact, publishers are even adjusting reach numbers to reflect changes in clicks. AI overviews take up almost half of a Google search page. And of course, we talked about the zero click environment. This means that users are getting the information they need from AI overviews and they don't click the cited sources or links below. Well, given this information, you might be asking, does news still matter? Right? The short answer is yes. In fact, it may matter more than ever due to two things. One, its heavily weighted influence in AI search engine citations, and two, the ability of AI to amplify news content in ways previously inaccessible. So in many ways, you can actually reach audiences better, the right audiences, and more of the right audience members. Well, we know the media landscape is shifting. We know news still matters, and we know PR professionals need a new framework for this AI driven world. And that's what drove us to ask this research question. What content characteristics actually drive AI engine outputs? And how can PR professionals optimize earned media for visibility and credibility in AI generated responses? So when we were looking for background in AI prioritization, there was a lot of speculation, some anecdotal guidance floating around, but not really empirical work to definitely say, here is what AI engines actually want from earned media. And that was the gap we were looking to fill with this research. And it's really a practitioner question, right? It's not academic. It's really what can we do? What are the actions that we can do to improve our brand AI visibility today? So here's how we built the study to answer that question. We started with 438 distinct prompts, deciding how to capture how real people search for health information. We were specifically looking around GLP-1 and weight loss topics and drugs like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy. We chose this area because they're high stakes health topics where misinformation can be actually quite dangerous, and it makes it an ideal testing ground. It's also what a lot of people are searching today. Health searches are some of the most common that we're seeing. These questions that maybe we don't want to ask our neighbor, we're going to ask ChatGPT, right? Our very trusted friend. So while we were looking at one particular industry here, we do recommend repeating this study across industries. But at the same time, we found that these findings can really be generalized. So I think that you'll find things independent of your industry where you're working that will be applicable from these findings. We ran these prompts across 10 personas. These 10 personas include a mix of demographics and psychographics. And we used a demographics that represented the actual distribution of the US Census data. At the end, we looked at three platforms, three AI search engines, and as a total, we got over 6,000 URLs in those responses. From those 6,000 URLs, we extracted the news articles, so specifically news content from those articles to look at different variables like brand presence, outlet reach. And the goal here was really to figure out which of these are actually making a difference and maybe which ones don't matter to the AI search engines. So with that, a question for the audience here. We found that there was a particular type of article that led to more AI search engine citations. It was more heavily prioritized. So if you want to put in the chat here what you think, I would love to hear some ideas. I'm taking a peek here. Which one of these do you think it was? It's an interesting topic. There's been studies on it, but this is really particular to AI search engines. Okay, I'm seeing some good ones coming here. Thank you for participating. Okay, I see educational, some Q&A and answers. Okay. There's a lot of overlap here. You're probably having a hard time making decisions because you say, wait, is it this one or that one, right? Great. Okay, I'm seeing some great answers here. Well, I'm going to give you the answer. If you said educational content, you're right. But don't worry if you said answers. We're going to get to that in a minute. Educational content from our descriptive statistics was the type of content that got cited most in this set of articles that were cited by AI search engines. You can see the next was answer driven. But when it comes to being cited, educational was kind of that first gate in, right, to getting cited in the AI search engine outputs. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of these other factors that get an article cited. So To do that, we're going to think about going into a venue or how we get past that velvet rope into the venue. Think about the concert that you've been to, right? Maybe it was 3 summers ago when you were trying to get yourself or maybe your kids tickets to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. I failed at that. But did you win the Ticketmaster war, right? How did you even get a ticket into the venue in the first place? These findings come from our descriptive statistics, or essentially what gets cited in the first place. And so there are 5 characteristics that we found from this piece of the research. The first was educational content, and we just covered that. Second is answer style articles, content structured directly to respond to a question a reader might have, which again, there's some overlap here with educational content. So educational content that answers a question is always a good option. Third, fewer outbound links. Gone are the days where you want to put all those links in an article, this maze of external links to try to get your SEO. We found that lean focused articles actually perform better in AI search engine outputs. Fourth, a PageRank score of at least 5. This is a baseline domain authority signal that AI engines appear to use as a credibility filter. So maybe SEO isn't all the way dead, right? We can talk about that later. And fifth, high topic prominence, meaning the core topic is front and center in the headline and throughout the piece. And this is a really key takeaway. And these 5 factors, they're really about content structure and clarity, which is great news for PR practitioners because these are things you can influence, right? You can pitch certain ways. You can make sure these things are in your content. So these are all a great way to get started in terms of getting articles cited. But now you're in the venue. You're at the concert. Are you having the same experience if you're up there, that back bleacher where you're kind of squinting and maybe see a few dots on stage? Or front row, right? Even better, that VIP backstage pass. Now, again, I'm not speaking from experience. I missed the Taylor Swift concert, but I heard it was quite life-changing. So if you went to it, you can tell me about it later. But I can absolutely imagine that elite experience of VIP. So let's look at what gets an article cited more frequently than other articles that are also being cited by AI. This is where the inferential statistics come into play from our regression analysis, okay? So now you're in the venue. How do you get cited more frequently? How do you get that VIP pass? First, answer style articles perform better than others. You might be saying, wait, you just told me educational content gets you cited. It does. But once you're in the venue, that's not going to be the most differentiating type of article. It's going to be one that answers a direct question. So how do you approach this? Educational content that answers a question is going to really get your article cited and then cited more frequently. We also found that comparison articles were differentiating and they can increase AI citations. Because if you think about it, many prompt questions are asking about this or that. Should I get this one or that one? Is this better? Is that better? Right? These are the type of questions we're asking into our ChatGPT or into Google that are being answered by AI overviews. The third is one of my favorite findings, human-focused visuals. Now, this showed up in both the descriptive stats and in the more in-depth analysis. And when I work with clients, I use a media impact score to predict how likely news coverage is to influence audiences. And it includes about 6 different tested factors. Of these factors, one of them is visuals with a human element. They get a heavier weight because I've done research that shows that these lead to more engaged time of humans. But I wasn't quite sure about the machines. And this study actually confirms that human visuals is a best practice across the board to influencing both AI pickup and engagement time of audiences. Fourth is more credible expert voices. Now, credible voices, it wasn't necessarily a barrier to get cited. So you can still get cited by AI if you just have executive quotes or maybe no quotes at all. But once you're in the venue, the articles that got cited more often had multiple credible voices. And in this case, we considered credible voices as third-party voices, so not as in-house executive voices. And in this case, they were doctors or experts or scientists. And fifth, high topic prominence. Again, we already discussed topic prominence, but the topic in the headline is key. So you could say, for example, if you're a hospital network, we're opening a new hospital. Okay, but that doesn't really have a topic, right? But we're opening a new hospital and it's going to decrease wait times for this neighborhood. Or we're opening a new hospital and it's going to decrease wait times for this knee surgery. Those are topics, things that people might actually be looking for, and that's going to increase the likelihood that it's cited in an AI search engine response. Well, almost as important as what predicts AI citation is what does not predict AI citation. The four following factors were not relevant in the data. First, outlet reach. Cue the confetti and party music. I've never really liked reach because it's a made up number and it only adds insight contextually. This doesn't mean reach doesn't matter at all, but it does mean it doesn't matter for AI citation as the machines prioritize credible outlets, which may not always be the ones with the highest logged reach numbers. Second, social shares or engagement. Now, this is a really interesting one because news content shared on social media is important if your audience is on social, which a lot of them are, but it doesn't influence the machine's prioritization. This is a good example of a factor that still matters to your strategy, right? AI is maybe not the end all be all of everything we do. And third, brand mentions and headlines. It doesn't matter to the machine if the brand is there or if the brand is not there. So my recommendation is put the brand there. It's not going to deter the machine from covering or from citing that article. And last is negative sentiment. It wasn't a key driver. It's actually great news. We know that negativity tends to trend, especially on social, but the machines are actually favoring more positive or neutral content. There's no inherent negative bias. So to wrap it up, here are just a few best practices, but we're going to talk about these in our conversation in our panel and talk about how we can now apply these findings. What are we seeing in our industry and how can we really maximize the work that we're doing to enhance visibility and credibility in this AI era? So with that, I'm going to stop my share so that we can see our panelists on the screen. Great. Hello, everyone. And we're going to jump into some questions. So thank you for, by the way, bearing with me. I did keep it within the time. So I kept it nice and succinct and we'll have lots to talk about now. So let's get into this. To kick off, let's talk about how is AI, specifically AI search engines, changing or maybe challenging some traditional PR notions in your work? And I'm going to ask Jen to kick us off with this. How is AI changing or challenging some of these traditional PR notions?
Yeah, so when I think about this, I think it's useful to think about the context of what changes with AI search engines and also how we adapt. So to start on the traditional model, typically we think about or we build a strategy around a media moment, which we think about the placement, the sequence, the coverage cycle, and maybe that initial wave of visibility and what it connects to. And so, what changes with AI search engines is thinking beyond that moment, which adds a new dimension to our thinking so that the content that surfaces can also come up even past the moment that it was issued, but only if it's really built for that. So when I think about what does that mean for how we adapt, for how content is retrieved, it's both having that single moment focus and then also looking broadly on the horizon. And so that can be new content forms. So you may have a burst of news that gets backed by a blog or editorial that sort of stacks to explain the why behind the news or more on critical issues. But it's both factoring in that initial moment and the wider aperture. And then secondly, a key point that I thought was really interesting in the study is the takeaway that LLMs reward meaning, not noise, which I think is really in our sweet spot as communicators. And, to the points that Angela referenced previously, clear, credible, plain language that is topic led over brand language, which gives us um, a good proactive positioning in aligning to a news cycle, and then equal parts originality and usefulness, so it advances both the news cycle and contributes to the knowledge base. And the point that I thought was really helpful there was, the content that performs best, which is kind of best case scenario a lot of times for what we work towards, which is, the study found content with expert voices, a clear topic focus, and a neutral to positive tone. So in reality, this is sort of a checklist for all of the things that define what good communications content really looks like and resonates in market. And when done right, it elevates rather than detracts from what we all do best.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's interesting too what you said about kind of the content that you're creating, this pool of content. We as humans, our memory can only take us so far. And I like to think about the machines and kind of essentially the memory. All of that content, everything that's out there is fair game, right? We know that there are certain preferences for recency, but you have to think about things more holistically than maybe we did before, because it's not just pulling from this one moment or the campaign or only what's most recent. It can really be any information that is available over hundreds of years, even documents that are available. Great insights there. I really appreciate
And
that.
one key point there, I think the companies that really do this best is in the tech industry, which,
Hmm.
naturally sort of aligns with the topic. But, the idea of innovating the form so that it's not just news that is issued, but also different forms of content that is really more of storytelling form, so that,
Hmm.
as you said, it isn't just sort of a siloed focus, but is prod, but builds to sort of broader continuity across a topic,
Yeah,
which
I love that.
requires intention.
Yeah. And I think also when we're creating content, you can kind of take the same content, but then story tell it for different audiences. And that makes an even bigger difference today with the AI search engines because we're speaking to different personas, different people who have different things that are going to come to them. So there's really a whole storytelling. And what people don't want, which is very clear, is they don't want friction, right? They don't want us to be salesy. They really want content that answers questions. Well, one of the key findings in terms of type of content, right, that tends to get cited by AI search engines is educational content, right, or content that answers questions. This is what we saw in the study. In a previous study that I did on engaged time to see what type of content readers spend more time with, I actually found a similar insight. It wasn't all that different. It was advice, which, as I said, there's a lot of crossover here, right? And advice is usually answering a question, right? It's an expert or a credible voice answering a question. So while this may be a best practice in public relations, I'm curious, and I'll ask this to Lightning, how does this align with your experience with content? Whether that's generating content, consulting clients on content, measuring content. Is this what you're seeing? Does it appear different, you think, for machines than humans? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I think there are always nuances, and I'll walk you through a few. But anytime we come across like a new technology or a new experience in public relations, I think we're often looking for the difference without realizing how many similarities there are just in a new delivery method. And so if you think about it, a lot of what AI at least is currently doing, and it might be different in a more agentic world or a future AI, but for now it's essentially an extension of us. And then people are using it as an extension of themselves as practitioners, but so are users. And so with that, it's reinforcing a lot of the strengths that could get stronger, and we can get to maybe more meaningful content like you've heard so far. But it's then also perhaps reinforcing some of the weaknesses of humans and some of the weaknesses of our industry in terms of one size all fits metrics or kind of burying or building these barriers sometimes between content walls. And we can come back to some of those things. And so, with that in mind, then, if it's an extension of us, I want you to think about it as far as this can both be, in the realm of you as your client. What does your client really want out of AI content? What does it want to achieve? And normally, right, that's some level of making the receivers of that content happy. So then what do those receivers, essentially as clients of AI or generative AI output, really want? And when we break it down that way, I'm not surprised to see everybody's answers kind of in the chat where there was some education, but we eventually want to get to answers. And
Mhm.
so, in many ways, what we're seeing from the data, at least so far, is that people are going to it in search of an expert, almost like you might go to a doctor's office, or even if you want to go to an expert comedian, whatever it might be in between. But by the time you leave that show, so like when you get to the secondary metrics, you will listen to a while as your doctor explains things, but ultimately you want action items. You want to say, so should I or should I not take this drug? Should I or should I not exercise 30 minutes a day in this way? Or should I eat apples or should I eat beets, which is going to be better for me? And so as you go down to the funnel, that's where people want to leave. And so if you think about it then that way, we're going to probably talk about, future recommendations on how to make your content a little bit better of that throughout this, but also then think that people are ultimately seeking some kind of like business outcome for themselves at an individual level. And then you've got to ask yourself, are you measuring that then properly just because they're getting your content? Again, do you have other kind of objectives that you want them to leave your doctor's office with? I do want to end on two more just general thoughts, and it relates to measurement because you're talking to a lot of measurement people. But one is also think critically about, is your audience really on that AI platform that you're looking at? Just as it would be perhaps different between MS Now and Fox News viewers or legacy media viewers versus TikTok followers. They could be very different audiences. I think we're still in the early stages of people sorting themselves out, but watch for those differences to continue. And then kind of lastly, also remind yourself that even if somebody's leaving with an expert opinion, perhaps by your successful AI content, if it's the type of topic that then puts them back out into the social world, they can still change a lot of their behaviors.
Mhm.
So just what we historically have always seen is that people trust experts, but they also trust the general popularity of something around them. And so this AI you could see could be very beneficial for something like private doctor's orders or things we don't want to ask in public. But if it's something that then puts you back into the social verse, we might reject all of that wonderful information and go back to what's popular around us, or at least hide, kind of where we're at with it.
Right. When you search on, your ChatGPT and say, what do people think about XYZ, we're seeing a lot of Reddit being cited, right? If you just ask, what's the better product, maybe you're going to get experts and some news articles that are cited. But when it comes to what people think, again, we're pulling from Reddit. Amber, do you want to add anything on that one size fits all? I feel like I saw your eyes spark there.
I was just nodding to everything that Lightning was saying. I'm going to chat about this a little bit later. It's really important, right? The idea of outcomes versus what you're seeing in AI. Just because somebody sees something, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to change their perception or what they actually do. So it is important to have that sort of journey of metrics that you're looking at, and you take this as a signal, not sort of the ultimate goal that you're working towards.
Yeah, I love that. Well, in our study, and I didn't mention this earlier, 99% of citations were what we call third party, meaning only 1% was truly owned content from the brand's website. But of this third party content, almost 50% was either news or what I call informational sources. These are a la Wikipedia, right? Maybe more of a third party owned informational source. But these together are both sources where PR can have an influence. So let's talk a little bit about that. And Jen, I'm going to go back to you on this one. How could this AI citation approach influence pair strategy? And kind of more specifically, are we at risk of over optimizing for AI at the expense of actual audiences? I think we kind of spoke to that a little bit here. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a practical takeaway that is super simple here, which is thinking about two audiences every time that you're approaching your strategy. The first is the person that reads the story, which influences the outlet or the third party that you might be approaching with the content. The second is really the machine that may surface it later on. And I think, the beauty of this is that right now in this moment, the same qualities really serve both.
Mm.
And I think that that's an important point because we can easily mistake the model as the audience. But when we do that, as Amber said, um, we treat the AI citation as the goal rather than the signal. And I think that that's something that we need to be very intentional about in crafting how we approach our communication strategy and ensuring that we optimize, both for things as all the things that you had stated, Angela, with plain language, with clarity, with ensuring that it is topic led, that it is educational, contextualized, but that we are very disciplined with keeping our editorial standards intact because it dilutes the value on both fronts. And so I think that that's a very important point that also speaks to this bigger point that in the scheme of things, the influence of the communicator really is expanding here rather than shrinking.
Yeah.
This is exactly where we operate. It just ensures that we need to be really disciplined and intentional about how we're approaching it so that we maximize our strategy.
Yeah. It might even be a little bit controversial. Some people have said that the AI search engine is a stakeholder or an audience. And I'm going to still fight that for now. Okay. It lasts me like 10 years when there are fully agentic actions taking place that don't require us. And then maybe I'll shift. But it's, as you said, Jen, it's still a channel, it's a method to reach our audiences. It doesn't mean we don't have to tailor things for the channel that's going to reach our audiences, but the audience is still the human, and we're still looking for their behavior. That's the outcome. Getting cited, getting in the output is not the end all be all, right? It's an indicator. It's going to move us in the direction of the outcome we're looking for. And it still is a channel of communication. So, again, as we're getting more agentic and humans are out of that, but they're still making a decision. They're deciding, I trust this agent to make this decision for me. So the humans are still making decisions in that. So again, I use it as a channel still, not as an audience. So I like how you said that a lot. Okay, well, Lightning, I'm going to go to you on this one. Is SEO really dead? Give us the final lawyer response.
Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. That's not to say it won't die one day, but I think you have to think about it maybe through some analogies. When I was first pausing to think, there's some comparisons to legacy media or TV is still around but dead in many ways, things like that. I think the better comparative is actually kind of movie theaters within the entertainment space. They are heavily declined from where they have been. And then there are always these stories about COVID and strikes, but they've been on the decline for 70 years. Slowly but surely, you see bigger falls when TV came along, you see bigger falls when cable came along, and then the internet, and then COVID, and then all these other things. But the best place forward still for most films is to get a decent exposure and launch in theaters. And then you get a bigger moment in the zeitgeist. And then you get to where most people are actually accessing your information on streamers and things like that at home. And so that's actually the model for like an Apple and an F1. They don't have to make the same money that they used to. So it's the same analogy to me. They don't have to be as successful in SEO, but they still want to get out there because as you saw, page relevancy, right, still kind of matters, even if it's not at the top of the cake, maybe like it used to be. It's baked in there somewhere, and it's still kind of in this ecosystem of expertise. And I think that's the same way you see with like the Oscars or whatever you call it. Fewer people are watching the Oscars, but if you ask people like what was the zeitgeist of the year or what was kind of critical, you kind of have to be in both sandboxes still to get the best of both worlds. And I think that's kind of where SEO is at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. At the movie theater, I mean, I still go for the popcorn, so I guess it still matters. Still kicking. Well, I'm going to move us a little bit. We've talked a little bit about measurement. We've got a few kind of big measurement people on this call. And I want to talk a little bit about that with this AI lens and AI search engine lens. The findings of this study and other studies that I've done around recall, engagement, and trust, they help to support content creation, but also content measurement, right? Helping us measure the impact of our peer efforts more effectively. So getting cited may be one indicator of reaching audiences, but as we've discussed, it's not the end all be all and shouldn't distract us from the outcome focused goals. So Amber, I'm going to move to you on this question. How do we measure success here beyond getting cited?
Yeah, I love this question. Thanks, Angela. So I want to start with something that I think is a step that often gets overlooked, which is defining what success means for the organization as a whole. So if we aren't clear on what those business outcomes are that we're trying to drive, it can be easy to let AI visibility become the goal instead of what we said, a signal or an indicator. But with that foundation in place, I'd say there are two things that I would look at beyond sort of getting cited. So the first one is, are we showing up in the right conversations, right? So questions and topics where our audiences are looking for information related to our products and services. And then when we do show up, is the information accurate or on message? And these two pieces give you a lot to work with, right? Opportunities to tighten your narrative, to make sure your differentiators are clear, to ensure AI is pulling from consistent and credible sources. And from there, I think there's an opportunity to translate that into a small set of metrics, right? So how frequently you do appear for key topics in different LLMs. As Lightning said, your audience is not necessarily using every single one. So that's an important piece to understand. Your share of voice versus competitors, the types of prompts that you're showing up for, so informational versus comparison versus more action oriented, and the kinds of sources that AI is pulling from. So these give a baseline that you can track over time. But ultimately, outcome metrics still matter more, right? This matters, but it still matters about what real people are doing because AI visibility isn't the same as what your audience is thinking, feeling, or doing. And we don't want to make the mistake of swapping, media impressions for an AI visibility score and calling that success. So the real question is still and will continue to be, are we getting real people to think, feel, or act differently in a way that supports the business? So AI success is really one part of the picture, but it's definitely not the whole picture here.
Yeah, I love that. Great insights there. One of the things I've been looking at, so in this case, we were looking at the prompts, right? Looking at personas and prompts and outputs. Another thing that I've been looking at is the prompts, and there's lots of tools that will give you actual prompts, right? People are searching using different query data, and this can also be a helpful indicator. Again, this isn't your outcome, but it's an indicator. And I've also seen some classification of prompt types, right? So maybe you start out with the awareness prompts, informational, right? And then maybe you're moving down that consumer funnel to more comparison and evaluation. And then you get to more behavior focused prompts, right? Where can I buy this? How, should I buy this that, or that? And then those are more behavior focused. And it's interesting because we've done analysis of social media posts, right? What's more behavior driving? And we can actually see that, right, in terms of the comments. So that's something that I would also be interested to look at in today's age, not just the outputs and the share model, but what kind of prompts are showing up? And are they where your audiences are? And these are great indicators to show connections, right? Especially if your earned media is getting cited to some of the outcomes that you still have to measure. And most importantly, Amber, as you said, define, right? We need to know what success looks like to measure it. And that I think is actually one of the biggest challenges. Another challenge with measurement, really across the industry, has been a lack of standardized metrics. This could be a potential challenge when it comes to GEO, AEO, right? We can't even align on a name for this. How are we going to align on a metric? Amber, I'm going to stick with you for a minute here on our measurement chat. What happens when every client or agency company is measuring AI visibility differently?
So I'm going to start by saying something that may be a little bit controversial, but it
Yes,
is
we love it. Give us controversial.
we are already living in this world, right? For as long as we've had PR, people have measured things differently. So you think about every media quality score weights elements differently. We've got multiple trust and reputation scores. We still see dollar values attached to coverage, right? So we are surrounded by black boxes. So I would suggest that the risk that we are seeing right now is that with AI, we create another one. So I'm personally not convinced that standardizing AI visibility is likely at this moment in time. If you think about all of the different factors, right? The different tools, the different personas, the different prompts. Somebody might do a voice note that's 2 minutes long in order to get an answer versus somebody who's typing in a 7 question or a 7 word question, right? There are too many nuances that exist So it would be
Mm.
difficult to get everybody to align on one methodology. That said, there is a core set of metrics that we could treat as a common baseline, and we've already touched on some of them, right? So citation frequency over time by engine, share of voice versus competitors, type of prompts you're appearing in, source mix. And especially if we can be transparent about how we're calculating those, they become much more comparable and useful, even if some things look different based on the organization that you're at. So for me, the real opportunity here is twofold, I would say. So one, recognizing, to your point, Angela, AI visibility gives us a window into what our audiences are seeing and thinking about, which provides a lot of actionable insight for us. And then two, leaning into transparency in our industry. There's an opportunity here, right? Can we share methodologies? Can we compare approaches? Can we learn from each other? So I'm less optimistic, I will say, that we're going to reach a universal standard for this, but more interested in getting to a small, understandable core set of metrics that teams can then build on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that transparency that you mentioned, right? Like that's really key to understanding, to creating more understanding across the table, right? Instead of just this is my study and I'm not sharing it with anyone. That's part of the reason why when we did this study, we wanted to share it with lots of people because it was done with a methodology and it's something that lots of people can use. So why not share it, right, in our industry so that we can elevate the work that we're doing and elevate our practice as a whole. The other thing that came to mind, and I use this for media measurement, is this idea of consistency over time, right? And comparison. We don't know what's good or bad. If you just give me a share of model or a number, I don't know if that's good or bad unless I'm tracking it over time or looking versus competitors in the industry. So really looking at that consistency over time. I do think the metrics are all different. There's hundreds, I mean, there may be even thousands now of tools that you could use to do this, and they're popping up all over the place. So when you do evaluate a tool, some of the things that I'm asking about are, personas and prompts and methodology, and really trying to have as much transparency into how it works instead of just buying into the box that I don't know what's in it. So I, of course, recommend to anyone asking the questions and then, of course, having that consistency over time. And these are metrics, like you mentioned, that we've added to our media measurement as an extension, right? Now how are you showing up in the model? What's getting cited? It's an extension of what we're doing with media work and communications. I love those insights. Really great. So I'm looking at the time. I'm going to wrap us up here. If you have any questions, again, feel free to put those in the chat. I'm loving some of the conversation we're seeing here. Really great insights. So again, feel free to put any questions for the panelists. I'm going to move there in just a bit here. Uh, to wrap up, I want to talk about trust. This word came up earlier, right? Trust is key to what content we choose to consume. And we know that people trust people, especially people they know or people like them. We've already seen some shifts in AI and in AI trust from some studies. And most astoundingly, really, is the usage statistics, right? You'll find different statistics. I pulled one recently, and this was from AP and the University of Chicago. It showed that 6 out of 10 adults have used AI search engines to find information. So the use alone to me is a indicator of trust. But let's talk a little about that. And Jen, I'm going to go to you on this one. How do you think trust is shifting in this AI area? Do we trust it? Is it increasing? Is there
Yeah.
backlash? What are your thoughts?
So when I think about this, I think about it not that it is shifting, but that it has shifted because you can't really say that 6 out of 10 is early adoption. It's more mainstream.
Right.
It's moved from I trust this source to I trust this answer. And if you
Mm,
think about it, you could kind of compare it to picking a restaurant. 10 years ago, you may have asked a friend that you trusted for a recommendation on a great place to eat. Then, Yelp entered the scene or other parties, and you immediately trusted reviews from strangers. Now we
mm,
have this instance where AI search just tells you where to go. It doesn't, you may not even, or according to your study, it may not even be backed with, a specific source that you look at. A person may not even click that or where the recommendation comes. So you're essentially saying you skip the friend, you skip the reviews, and you just trust the answer. And that's exactly what I think is happening here. And it's an interesting place to be as a communicator because people trust what AI points to. And I think as AI adoption grows and matures, source credibility will matter even more, especially if users rarely see the full article. So it raises the stakes for things like earned media accuracy, expertise, and transparency that
Mhm.
is filtered into that. And with that, when we think about um, this all playing together, it's really also a big deal because with content potentially being cited alongside low quality sources in an AI response, that association sort of undermines credibility for everyone
Mhm.
in the mix. But if your content consistently meets the signals that engines look for, you're sort of building a competitive advantage or a compounding advantage that
Mhm.
benefits not just you, but everyone else also in the mix. So
Mhm.
when I think about earning trust, I think of it the same way as I mentioned before on those two levels, where you have the human audience and the system that curates what they see. So the good news that we have at this current moment is that the same things drive both.
Mhm.
You strive to be credible, to be clear, to be useful, and everything naturally sort of fits. And I think that that's a good place to be, but it's also driven by discipline and intention.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. One of the things that we've said a few times here is transparency, right? One of the important topics around AI use, whether that's for measurement, content creation, or even optimizing AI search engines, is ethical use. Now, Lightning and I, we worked on a study with Dr. Julie O'Neill from TCU and the Measurement Commission, and this was early on. I mean, I think we started almost 2 years ago on that study, Lightning, and it was looking at ethical use of AI in measurement. One of the findings was that not many were using it for measurement yet at that time. It was still kind of early, still is not totally widely adopted. And then we also found that there were some ethical concerns around transparency, bias, and of course the black box models. Lightning, I'm going to go to you. What are some ethical recommendations? And are there ethical lines that we might cross when we're trying to maximize our earned media?
Yeah, I want to I'll pull out three quick things that I think are
Mhm.
ongoing. The first one is where you get people get fewer ethical concerns around measurement, but as a measurement person, we're not surprised because again, it's
Mhm.
reinforcing a lot of the issues of we still struggle with conceptualizing how valuable our work is, what our audiences are doing, and we're seeing that there again. What's interesting just on that metric though is you get people's lowest trust or biggest ethical questions of AI being kind of too one size fits all and missing diverse audiences, which I completely translate as, in other words, missing audiences and misunderstanding audiences. And again, what it's doing still so far is reinforcing our weaknesses that I mentioned earlier. And so to think critically about if you had weaknesses 3 years ago, pre-AI, are they getting worse? Or if you address them at all? The second camp that I always find most interesting here is just there are many studies over the years. If you ask people, are they smarter than the average person, and or are they more ethical than the average person? A lot of the times, the studies will come out that about 89% of people think they're smarter than the average person, or 92% of people think they're more ethical than the average person. Obviously, mathematically, that means about 40% of those people are wrong, right? And what we see is the bias question of our own ethics.
Mhm.
Within the industry, people are more concerned about what other people are doing within their own ethics. But if you ask them, are you being transparent with your clients about your usage or where it's coming from? They generally say that's less of a concern. And so think critically about what that means internally in your organization. And the last part, the third one, I want to finish with kind of building off Jen's notion of like quality here. Think about when we're talking about black boxes or echo chambers. When streamers came out, they of course said, "Oh, we're not going to have advertising. We're not bound by these old legacy models of 30-second ads." And now everybody wants to force you into your advertising Netflix category. And in that, they're making a lot more money off of you, but you're also losing access to premium content. And only the wealthiest people can now experience that on streamers. So AI is so far proving itself to be the same and quickly catching up. The half-life is much faster with AI as it was with streamers. As the pirates rid out in the first phase and stole everybody's copyrights, the drawbridges have gone up. And so in many ways, that's a movement in the right direction in terms of copyright ethics. But in terms of pricing for general users, what that means is we're quickly getting to the place where certain people paying for certain packages are going to get the most credible content. And then the masses, if you will, that won't be wanting to pay for those rates are going to see everything else in the kind of unpaid slop. And so depending on what field you're in, I want you to think critically about where your content is going and where your content could still go into kind of the free space, but know then that you're going to be against a lot of other low quality content, but 90% of people might be there. So how do you still stand out kind of within that? And again, that's not all that different from what we've experienced with any other kind of model in the past. But those kind of elite barriers or access to information, I think, is only increasing, not
Mm.
decreasing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think also as we're seeing more ads pop up, right? AI overviews, it's coming, right? The ads are coming. I'm curious how that's going to maybe influence some of the ethical implications as well, right? Where we now have a trusted source of information, but then we also have these paid piece of information, and will it become fuzzy as it has in the earned versus paid content that we see today as well? So I'm looking here. I'm loving some of these comments, by the way, Tim and Fraser. I love those comments. Absolutely, we do reprompt, and these are conversations we're having, right? That they're recreated. It's a different channel, different methodology, but we're really having some of these same measurement conversations today. So I'm looking at the time here, and I'm going to see that if there's some questions. I'm going to take this one from Debbie. She's curious to know what the findings indicate for financial topics and AI search engines. Do they cite experts, stats, advice, or something else? Uh, I'll add here that what I see so far, again, is experts, generally not your in-house, unless you're an organization that maybe is viewed as an expert. So I'll give an example of AAA, right? AAA, it's a company, but people kind of see them as experts when it comes to travel and where to stop and the tip trip or whatever, the trip tips, right? What do we call those? So they're known for that. So even though it's a company, they're also kind of viewed as experts. I would definitely say whenever you can lean on those third party experts, I do think statistics would make a difference, but I would say a credible expert giving advice. Any other thoughts on that in the financial space?
I would say the
Yeah,
same. Is what I've
yeah.
seen.
We have a question here about the key demographic for AI search. Now, I've seen a few studies on this. It's definitely the younger audiences, but any other thoughts on the demographics that we're seeing using AI for information?
I've under 30 generally has been up to more of the three-fourths. It's definitely lowest amongst older audiences, but I think people would be surprised that it's still about 50%, even with the oldest or lowest age demographic. So everybody's kind of pretty much over the hump.
Perfect. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them here in the chat and I'll try to get to them before we wrap up. I have just a couple more here. Amber, I'm going to go to you on this one. What role should communications teams play when clients are exploring AI tools on their own? So whether those are, maybe in-house people not in comms who are exploring, or maybe your clients, what's our role as communicators?
Yeah, I think communicators has a really important opportunity to lead here. I think some may say that comms, missed the boat with social or with SEO, but this is an opportunity for us to dive in and to really experiment and be knowledgeable about what's being said and what's happening in the industry right now. So I would say there are three areas where we have this opportunity to lead. So one is as sort of translator and educator, if you will, to explain to folks what AI tools can and cannot do, or perhaps rather should and should not be used to do.
Mhm.
So can do, I mean, like for first drafts and for brainstorming ideas and for poking holes in strategies. Can't or probably shouldn't use for, writing a apology from the CEO after a crisis, for example, right? Probably in those sensitive areas, there's opportunity still for humans to be very much leading the work. So comms can say, this new feature exists, here's how we'll use it, and here's where we're going to make sure that we're keeping a human in the loop. The second opportunity area is as a governance partner, so working with legal, IT, HR, privacy to set some of the guardrails that are necessary. So, what is going into public tools? Where should you use enterprise or closed models? How and when are you disclosing the use of AI, for example? And it's absolutely something that communications should also be adding to their crisis comms plan as well, right? If you've got a workforce that's highly dependent upon AI, what happens if it goes down? What happens if it malfunctions in a way that is extremely negative for the organization? You should be planning for that, and that is helping position you as a strategic advisor as well as, future focus for the organization. And then the third area I would say is really as an experiment lead. So a lot of teams we know are using AI, but most probably I would suggest without a clear strategy. So comms has the opportunity to run structured pilots to evaluate effectiveness, and bring insights into, what's saving time, what's improving our quality, what's giving us better audience understanding. There are lots of really great measurement opportunities there. So I would say overall comms really has the opportunity to turn random AI experimentation into something purposeful so that
Mhm.
organizations can move fast without that risk of breaking trust.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I'm going to go to a few questions here. One of the questions was from Kevin. What are some of your favorite tools or ways to measure brand presence in LLM outputs? Are there any tools that you're enjoying or that you might recommend to Kevin? Some of the ones that I use, Profound, Scrunch AI. The one thing I would add is there's lots of tools out there. You just want to ask enough questions when you're exploring one to make sure it's a good tool. Because I've seen some that I'm like, oh, well, you don't have personas. That's not really going to help me. You're just doing prompts, right? I can just do that on a browser. So really looking at something that can create your audience's best. And then keep in mind, just having a tool is probably not going to take it all the way for you. You need the consultant layer. So whether that's you in-house or your partners, but layering on what does this mean for us? Because again, having more dashboards, having more charts probably isn't the answer, but interpreting those in a way that makes sense that we can use is going to be an important role of communicators. Again, as Mary asked a question here, similar to social media listening, what are some tactics to track how our topics are going out in AI? And this is a good question. One of the things that I might recommend here is when you do these citations with the exercise with a model and you look at what's being cited, I would look at those news articles that are getting cited. Are your topics showing up there, right? So you want to show up, are they in the output itself, but also are they being cited? Because that's another kind of layer of indication. So oftentimes we're looking at just the output or the share, but take it a step further and look at the content that's being cited because you want to influence the base or the content that's going to go into that output. Any other thoughts on that? I'm trying to get a few here. Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, from Kenya, Cynthia, thank you for joining us. How can AI help measure behavior change and awareness levels in PR campaigns? Indicators, right? There's still indicators, but I think looking at the types of prompts is going to be helpful. From awareness prompts, I'm getting information, to I'm making a decision, going to lead to behavior prompt as well. Okay. And I'm going to end here. Oh, we got like a couple minutes left. Okay, I'm doing one speed round with our panelists, one more here. Again, as a reminder, the recording will go out to everyone who's registered, as well as a link to the full white paper. So if you want to read a little bit more about the study, feel free to reach out to any of us, connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to chat about AI, measurement, all these things. So final question, and we'll do a speed round with all the panelists. Just give us one thing, one action that comms teams can take away today around AI visibility, just one thing that could come from the study or a discussion, your experience. What's your one takeaway for the teams? And we'll go Amber, Lightning, Jen.
Okay, perfect. My recommendation is to do a very simple audit on one topic where you think that you should be showing up. And this can be scrappy research. You don't have to have a tool. You can just do incognito tab and go to whatever platforms you want to go to. But look at, do you appear at all? If you do appear, is the description accurate? What kind of information is coming through? Who else is showing up? And then don't just show that to your leadership. Develop a strategy for how you address whatever is coming from that, and then take that to your leadership. I think it's an immediate sort of career boost and positions you as more of a strategic advisor in the organization.
Perfect. Thanks, Lightning.
Mine is similar, but in the old days, you used to have interns or entry-level folks clip newspapers for you. There are a lot of people that will sell you tools, and some of them are helpful. I would have at least one of your interns or entry level people try to search these things out, even without quantitative metrics, and find out when they're finding black swans, find out when things are broken, or find out when, whether it's you or a competitor, are actually getting through anyway, even though you shouldn't necessarily be. So, one of the questions in the chat was, what are some brands that are doing this well? I've seen BMW do this well, and I've seen
Mm,
L'Oreal do this well so far. They're definitely getting cited without third-party experts, so they're kind of sneaking through why. So
mm.
whether you have a team, have somebody do that, or if it's just you need to block off like an hour a week and play with three or four of the different browsers and see if you can find where it's broken, and then ask yourself what that means.
Great, Lightning. And Jen, wrap us up.
Yeah. So as I said before, AI doesn't reward noise, it rewards meaning. And I think the key here is really creating that habit. The study
Mm,
gave us a clear set of criteria that's pretty easy, that doesn't even require extra budget, topic-led
yeah,
headlines, human visuals, expert voices, explainer contextualize. The action is really to make it deliberate, rinse and repeat, and then assess. And I think that that's a perfect foundation for anybody that's delving into this.
perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate you all joining us today and really appreciate the panelists. Such great insights. Excited to put this into practice. All right. Well, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining. Thanks, everyone. And
Bye.
thanks for all those great comments. Appreciate it. Have a great day.